monter, Ipania Yeki Kupesa.
Ipania e privel kisa.
Ipania Yeki Kupesa.
Ipania e privel kisa.
Gami Kupel, Uniona Seque, Aiskono, Usea Beigi Kashane Tutsmon. Ay, 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 Usea Pawadi. Monte Ipania Yeki Kupesa.
Ipania e privel kisa.
Ipania Yeki Kupesa.
Ipania e privel kisa.
Kami kuwish
Uni kudesa. Vetilate. Uni paleta como solepana.
Ay, 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 Sea Pawadi. Monte Ipania Yeki Kupesa.
Ipania e privel kisa.
Ipania Yeki Kupesa.
Ipania e privel kisa.
Kami kushori Unila mazante Azua sekote Unila mekaribien kitushuka. Ay, 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 Sea Pawadi. Monte Ipania Yeki Kupesa.
Ipania e privel kisa.
Ipania Yeki Kupesa.
Ipania e privel kisa.
Kami kubo
Unis de la passe, yes les autres côtés. C'est le picado nous a passé avec place.
Ay, 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 c'est un paradis. Merci mon Dieu, Ipania Yeki Kupesa.
Ipania e privel kisa.
Ipania Yeki Kupesa.
Ipania e privel kisa.
Kami kudo Ubani laje Ole za kote Uniona safa kibele pesa. Ay, 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 Sea Pawadi. Merci monte Ipania Yeki Kupesa.
Ipania e privel kisa.
Ipania Yeki Kupesa.
Ipania e privel kisa.
Merci monte Ipania Yeki Kupesa.
Ipania e privel kisa.
Ipania Yeki Kupesa.
Ipania e privel kisa.
Merci monte.
Hi, good evening. Good evening. Good evening, folks.
I presume you're saying good evening to us or to, I guess, the general audience?
Yes, we
I'll say
are.
good evening back.
Yes, Dr. Pleasure. I think that we are live.
Is ASP Wicks going to be joining us?
ASP appears to be late, but we have a youngster with us. Youngster Sanford, who wants to share his experience.
Okay.
Yes, so I'm just going to show him in the screen right here. And yeah, gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
I think that we are live on Facebook. So let me say good evening to our followers. This is our weekly broadcast, Contending for Dominica, your host, Joshua Francis. And I have two distinguished men here with me, particularly trained criminologist and sociology. Dr. Introduce himself. I don't think I'll do justice in introducing this colorful, distinguished gentleman, so he will let us know who he is. I don't think he's a stranger to Facebook or to Dominica generally. He's a man who is well known for the region and internationally, and several writings and publications on areas of sociological significance, criminology, and so on and so forth. We also have young Sanford here with us. Sanford will also introduce himself. I invited him here at last minute. He will be here basically to share his experience with us in respect to the gender disparity, the bias, amongst other things. So let me take the opportunity as usual to welcome our followers here on Facebook, Contending for Dominica. Today is the 24th of January. 21. We're happy to be here. We want to thank the Lord for the day. We want to thank Him for His blessings. We're looking forward to have a very interactive program here this evening. We are dealing with a very important issue, and that has to do with the marginalization of men. This is an issue not only in Dominica, but in the region, and we can go further beyond the region and say it's an international issue. In recent times, we have noted that women seem to be outperforming men academically and in some other areas. Traditionally, women would stay home and the men would go to work, and then women started going to school, and it would appear that women are now outperforming men at school. It also appears that the persons who are finding themselves in trouble are the men. At PTAs, the men are absent, women present. At churches, women present, men absent. At the bars, well, we cannot say women are absent, but we would say that the participants or players at the bars are predominantly women. So in very important areas of our society, it appears that women are the leaders. And the question is, what is happening? Are our men being marginalized? Are men losing their role in the family? We are now seeing that women are working and have become financially or economically independent to the point where men in certain situations are now dependent on women. So I am happy to have the two gentlemen here with me. I'm going to allow Dr. Seja to tell us more about himself. I am one of them who has great admiration for this gentleman. He's never shy to share his knowledge with us. He's on radio, he's on social media platforms, explaining to us many sociological stuff. And this evening, he's going to tell us about men. Of course, he's going to explain it from his own angle. So I will allow him to introduce himself, and thereafter, that will be followed by young Sanford, who will tell us who he is, what he's doing, and he will speak to the issue of gender bias. So gentlemen, once again, thank you for taking your time to be here with us. Of course, you did not have to be here, but you chose to be here, and it is because you're selfless and you wish or desire to make a contribution to the national discussion on marginalization of men. Of course, I also want to thank our followers. You too, you could be elsewhere, but you choose to be here with us on Contending for Dominica. So once again, Good evening, Emma Frederick, wherever you are. Valerie Chase, good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to Mr. Seja. Mr. Seja, good evening, and how are you doing?
Good, and I presume by Mr. you mean doctor, because this is my formal title. And in the days when there are a lot of people who are not doctors, that people insist in calling doctors, those of us who are real doctors, in formal settings, like to remind hosts to remember our titles. So
yes, very well.
So consider that so.
Yes.
In terms of introduction, my name is Dr. Peter Keith Bennett Saint Jean. I am a product of I'm Saint Jean by fathers, by paternal background, but I'm an Anthony by maternal background. And because of this male-dominated society, even I who consider myself to be a feminist, sometimes forget to give the Anthony side of my family enough recognition for my presence. Were it not for my mother, I would not have been born this way. So I am from the village of Trafalgar, the wonderful Roseau Valley. As I sit now, I am in my community. I'm so happy to be here. I've been here for the last close to 7 weeks, and I should be here for a little while longer. I am a criminologist. I am a sociologist. I am a peaceologist. I'm the founder of peaceology, that I define as the science and practice of making peace profitable. I'm also a master's of arts and counseling psychology student, my first year as a counselor and therapist. I know a lot about psychology and so on from my training, but I'm getting some more education in that regard. I have published books, I have published articles, and I am very active. Most importantly, I love being a good father to my children, and a good husband to my wife, and a good neighbor to those who are near to me, and a good citizen of the world.
Good night. My name is Claudio Sanford. I'm the son of Claudia Sanford and the son of Charlene Elise. Annette Sanford is also my stepmother. I'm from the Carnago territory, but I live in Kinfi right now. I'm an economics major, but I actually just finished my economics degree. I have an associate's degree in economics. And well, I spearheaded in research as my focus. So that is what I am right now. I also have a lot of background in art and designing.
Okay, very well. Thank you, gentlemen. Let me take the opportunity to apologize for putting the title of our colonial masters to the gentleman as opposed to his more acceptable title, Dr. Seja. Dr. Seja, I mean, you just heard the man's track record. You know, he's a peaceologist, he's a criminologist, he's a psychologist. Well, I don't think he said that he's a psychologist, but you could only understand the qualifications that he has. I'm going to have to excuse myself just for 1 second. I apologize to my listeners, to our listeners. Hello, Mr. Wicks? Yeah, I'm fine. Okay, very well. I sent it via Facebook. Check your Facebook Messenger. Yes. No, just go on Facebook Messenger. Yes. All right. Let me just apologize for that. Mr. Superintendent Claude Weeks supposed to be here with us, and he's running late, and he just wanted the to get on. But so, Dr. Seja, we are talking about marginalization of men. First of all, before we go into the bowel of that discussion, do you agree or disagree that men generally have been marginalized?
Well, I am not to the point of agree or disagree yet. I first of all need, as a social scientist, to clarify some things, because before we have any type of intelligent conversation about anything, it is very important that we establish working definitions and clear some assumptions about agreement or disagreement. First of all, for me as a social scientist, it's very important to make a distinction, distinctions among what is the presence of something, what might be a disproportionate amount of something, and what is a domination, right? So the very fact that we have the presence of men and women in society in various numbers, and when we talk about disproportionate amount, we are talking about percentages and populations. And when we are talking about a domination, right, then we are talking about power. And it is very important for us to conceptually distinguish those things, because we know that persons who are in numerical minority could be in power domination. And the representation of people based on the percentage of them in society and the percentage of them in certain subsections of society, that is to be recognized. So the fact that women may be more present doesn't mean that they are more dominant. Because when we talk about domination, we are talking about issues of power, and we still know that women undergo a 32% after the last global statistics, 32% disparity in political power, and sometimes even higher percent in disparity in other aspects of life. Women are still 2 times more than men more likely to work at home or to work in jobs where they do not get paid. So there is an implicit assumption about the domination of women that presupposes or does not sufficiently respect the idea that women are 50% of the gender and women are probably best in disparity, ideally, as 50% of the contributor. So when we talk about the domination of women and men falling apart, women still have a long way to go to catch up to men. So the idea, if the idea is that men should remain dominating, and men should always remain higher in number and higher in pay and higher in prestige, then we can say, yes, there's a crisis for men because they're no longer dominating and subordinating women and so on and so forth. So the men as dominators are losing their way. But if we were to conceive an idea that men and women account for 50% of the gender in the world, and women should just as much as men have the power and the ability and the prestige that men have, with a 32% disparity behind in achievement in power in society, we would say that no, it is not about that men are becoming an extinct factor. It's not that men are becoming dominated by women, but that society is catching up, giving women the opportunity to be 50% of gender power as is rightfully their own. So it depends on how you look at it. It depends on how you look at it. And for me, as the type of social scientist that I am, the type of humanist that I am, and a father of 3 daughters and 1 son, I do not see it as an issue where men are losing and women are about to take over and the world is going to be whatever. I agree that there are some aspects where, and we'll talk about that more as I close in my introductory comments. I know that there are some aspects of society where men should be doing a lot better, and they are doing a bit worse, or men seem to be doing worse because women are doing better, right? So we can talk about that. But my idea is that women are 50% of our gender. They are lagging behind, and we cannot see their success as necessarily a failure of men. We can see it that way, but I would question the legitimacy of that.
Okay.
Right.
Very interesting perspective. Thank you, Dr. Sesha.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, I guess like you said that you were a feminist, so I understand your perspective from the beginning of your statement. I believe men are being marginalized. I like that you clarified by definition what that means. So I believe in certain aspects that men are being marginalized. Not necessarily that the women are doing better, that they overshadow us, but that a large majority of men are being forgotten, or they aren't being given the necessary amount of attention that they would need to keep up to the standards of every average individual. So I'm going to disagree with you partially, because I believe that they are being marginalized just based off my research and my reading that I have been doing. And I guess we will discuss that further along as we continue with Mr. Joshua Francis. But
Yeah,
I'll remain here for now.
yeah. Both of you have very interesting perspectives, but we talk about marginalization of men from a general point of view, and I see where Dr. Seja is coming from, but I do agree with young Sanford in that in certain areas of our lives, it is clear that men seem to be lagging. After all, we can take a walk in town tomorrow, just an informal survey, and we will know that the people who are getting off the buses to go to work are the women. Even on our way to Roseau to go to work, for example, I live at Belfast, and on my way to Roseau, after 6 in the morning, I will see that the people at certain shops having alcohol very early are men, not the women. Then I find myself in court, and people who are standing as defendants or accused are men, not women. And then later in the week, I would go to church, and the people in the church are women dominated and not men. So I'm just using such examples to show that it may well be that our men have been marginalized. And on the other hand, Dr. Seja is saying, well, women are doing better, and it's not that we are being marginalized. I am not too sure exactly where Dr. Seja stands with that. I will go with...
Well, let me just clarify that, because I'm being mischaracterized, and we need to clean that up before you take this a bit further. First of all, Mr. Stanford has wrongly characterized what I said. And when we talk about disagreements, we have to be very specific about what issues of disagreements are. So I would like to hear what it is that he's talking about disagreements. I don't see basis for disagreements here. What I have said is that there are different dimensions in terms of the questions of what we call marginalization, and if we were to talk about domination, right? I have said that, yes, I have acknowledged that men are not performing as well as they used to or they should be in various aspects of society. If you want to call that marginalization, then you have to define what it is you're talking about, because oftentimes words like marginalization or words that are verbs that sit to be created like victimization assumes that there is a certain perpetrator, right? Now, if we say that men are underperforming, right? If we say that men are underperforming and men are being marginalized, these are not the same thing, because marginalization has the connotation of an action of doing, right? So if men are like men are being suppressed, women are being oppressed, people are being victimized, it's a verb in that regard. And if we speak about it as a verb in that regard, then we must speak about about who's oppressing them and who's marginalizing them. At the same time, we both agree that men are underperforming. So if we use the idea of the language of underperforming or marginalization, we may have some sort of agreement. But if we are using marginalization, you need to demonstrate and to qualify to me who is the actor that is causing the victimization of the marginalization of men, right? So that is. So I just want to make sure that we see here, and if one is using my words, I would like them to characterize it and qualify it properly.
Very well.
All right. Let me apologize first for saying that I disagreed with you. To me, I would define the word marginalized as to ignore or to have something like in your preference, something not to focus on, right? Which is why, as Mr. Joshua Francis pointed out, which were some of his observations, you realize that not a lot of people make those observations. So a lot of that is marginalized, it's being ignored, it's not being given the necessary focus or attention that it requires. So that would be my broad definition.
Okay.
If I misconstrued what I said.
No, that's good. So yes. Okay, so in that context, in terms of the way that boys are educated, in ways that men are socialized, in terms of the way of our economy, if you're talking about the fact that priority is not given to their development, I think we are in good agreement, and I think we are saying the same thing in that regard, in terms of in that regard. So thanks for the clarification. I just wanted to, before we pile the stories up on the foundation, I just wanted to make sure that we are building our house on rocks and not on sand.
Very well. So while both of you speak of education, probably we could explore that area a little bit more. Of course, we do not have the data here to speak on a scientific basis. However, we have observed that our girls seem to be outperforming our boys up to a tertiary level. For example, I can use law. in recent times, when you look at the number of people who have been admitted at the bar in Dominica, predominantly women. And Sanford probably has that experience. You, Dr. Seja, as a professor at school, you may have taken note that more women seem to be showing interest in academia to the past. So if that is true, let's just accept that as the truth. What would be the main reason why women seem to be outperforming men, or girls seem to be outperforming boys academically? And I do not just want to look at the tertiary level, but look at from the beginning, from kindergarten. What really is happening to our boys?
Is that for me or Mr. Stanford? I do not want to dominate the conversation. Right?
Yes, well, we'll start with you, Dr. Seja, because you actually mentioned it. You mentioned some things about boys.
Okay, so here is what it is. From the beginning of time, from time immemorial, men have been seen, or men have led, except in matriarchal societies, men have led industry. There's been a private and public sphere, where the public sphere seems to be one mostly devoted for men from the work and politics and so on, and the private sphere in the home and so on for women. In the Industrial Revolution changed some of that, because we had to learn through technology, get formal education to develop an industry. But even before the Industrial Revolution, we're dealing with hunter-gathering society, with agricultural society, and so on. A lot of manual labor was needed for a lot of work, right? And when we became, and women could not compete so much because of the sizes and the mere strength. Not to assume that women are weaker, but for muscular build and socialization and so on, a lot of that sphere was men heavy labor. When the industrial revolution came on, and then education was more important, then raw muscles were no longer the premier, right? So brains and the ability to understand and to process critical thinking is important. It turns out that a lot of men were dominating the workplace, but then a lot of women, through education, got those opportunities, and more we find that families really raise their women, but basically pamper the boys, right? Especially in the age now where you have a lot of homes that are raised by single households where it's mostly women, right? So the girls are told that if you don't get an education and to produce for yourself, if you don't marry a man that has money, you will be left crying, as we say, right? But the men are told, if you just open up your shirt and you show the hair on your chest, then you can get a job, you can do a hustle. You know, guys get involved in illegitimate activities economically. You find favor with women who like the bad boys and so on. And you find that the creative underground economy is dominated by men because of the danger and so on. And they believe that they can get quick money because of the exposure. They're not being raped as women are being raped and so on. So what has happened is that we have developed a culture where men believe they can get money and have domination without much education, but we tell women that if you have to get ahead, you better go to school, you better go to learn, you better behave yourself. And if you want to get a good man, you have to be prim and proper. So after that socialization, after multiple periods of time, and women following those ideas, we have the outcome of what we see now. There's a little more complication to that, but I don't want to have too much of a long-winded answer. But these things happen over generation. And it doesn't mean that boys are not being educated, because men are being educated as well. But Joshua, I also want to talk about the difference between a proportion and a percentage in a change. For example, and we have to be careful with statistics. While you have more men, for example, that they show up before the courts as subjects of criminality, the percentage of increase is actually higher among the women than the men. Because just imagine if you had 5 women and now we have 15, you already have a 200% increase there, right? You have an exponential increase. But if you already have a 500 men and you just have, an increase of 20 men, the percentage is different, right? So when we compare, we need to look, because oftentimes people look at the statistics and say that women are becoming a lot more criminal because there's so few of them. Because you have 1 today and then you have 12 next year, that's a big number. So we also need to look at the disparity and the numbers, but realize that over time, the way the labor market has functioned, it has functioned in a way that rewards women for education and jobs, but does not line up with men that way. And also men that could be less educated sometimes will get more pull string and get more opportunities because of their gender. So the women almost have to work twice as hard sometimes to be able to get at par with men.
Oh, okay. You done? All right, nice. Well, it's for education. I actually did a research topic on education, but it was on the tertiary level of education. I see you spoke on the primary school level, the secondary school level, and the tertiary school level. But I think we can all agree that when you watch something of face value, you get a very clear picture. So when you watch either the primary, secondary, or tertiary level, if you watch a class, you notice that it is predominantly women. There's more women than men. And you realize as you go up from primary to secondary to tertiary, the gap widens. So we speak about statistics, and it's very important to know that obviously there are more women than men. But if you have the exact same enrollment from primary school, whether it is 60 to 40 or 30 to 50, whichever, however it is, in terms of women to men, you can see that the gap is widening, which means we need to pay more attention to what is actually creating that problem. But if it is 60-40, and then it's 70-30, and then 80-20, then clearly there is a problem. Even my research right now, the one that I underwent in the state college at tertiary level, you have a very huge gap in performance. And not necessarily performance in terms of academics, but just in graduation rate. You have women graduating at a way higher rate than men. There are way more male dropouts than there are female dropouts. Like that is something that needs to be acknowledged in our education system. And that then again, we should bring up the question of marginalization. Are we just ignoring that? Like, is it not being noticed? Because it is a very, very clear picture. And I personally believe that our men are in trouble. So that's my opinion on our education sector.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting perspectives, and it's very important. Sanford spoke about the disparities in performance between the boys and the girls. Yes, we acknowledge the percentages as far as the number of boys versus number of girls. There are more girls generally, but over time, the boys are the ones dropping out from high school. They're the ones who do not go to university, meaning that more women seem to be going higher than men. I just see that Ashma McDougall, a professor at the State College here, she says that 3-1. For every 3 women, there are 1 man at the university level. The question is why? And Dr. Seja alluded to socialization. Is it that the family has broken down? Is it that the family is not what it used to be, or the family focuses more on the girls than the boys? Are there in-school factors in the way in which girls are treated versus boys? Is there feminization of education? Is it that there are more female teachers relative to more male teachers, and as such that infiltrates into the way the girls are treated versus the boys? So I am still on education. We're going to talk about the court system, and I was hoping that Superintendent Weeks would join us. He came on, but there seems to be a problem. But education, which is considered to be the tool of success, and as Nelson Mandela put it, it is the greatest weapon that a man can possess. It would appear that more women are attaining education relative to men, and as such, it is something I'm going to spend some time on, and I'm sure both Sanford from his experience and his research will speak a little bit more to that, as well as Dr. Pedra, because I believe there must be some kind of cause. We already identified a family, and then I want to look at in-school factors versus out-of-school factors, and whether the mass media is having any impact on our boys relative to our girls. Whether there are subcultures in our society which are affecting our boys more than our girls. Is religion affecting the boys relative to the girls? So I would like us to look at it from different perspectives.
Well, go ahead, Mr. Stanford. I think you said you were going to ask Mr. Stanford to go ahead. So I want to, I'm careful, I'm making sure that I do not dominate the conversation. Mr. Stanford.
All right. Okay. So we're still on education. Let me just be clear. All right.
Yes.
As I was saying, like in terms of graduation, I actually have an average statistic right here. the average difference, right, is actually 26% to 74% currently in terms of the graduation rate between the male and females at DSC. That is the difference. And as you can see, it's not a small difference. That's a massive difference. Like, that is cause for concern. That is cause for a conversation, right? So, well, he went back on the history and the socio-economical reasons, the cultural reasons. And I agree with him based off that premise because culturally, men are actually taught to be more macho, more, open up your chest, pop out your chest, and you would get some sort of reward for it, for being more masculine. But in modern times, I don't think that helps at all, really. I feel like that it's a misconstrued idea that if a man puffs out his chest, he's going to get any reward for it. Right now, we have a world where it is your qualifications, your experience, that is what you need. If you puff out your chest, someone will laugh at you. So the world is becoming more competitive for both men and female. And I believe that women are stepping up and they are performing very well. But we need to focus more on our men because they are lagging behind. And you can go ahead.
So I just drew an illustration here that gives us an idea of how social scientists would think about it, right? So let us just go, we're talking about in 1960 here on this end, and on 2018 here. We see somewhat of the rise in education, for women and men, right? And we see the drop in education and graduation for men. The issue is, where is this going? It came from somewhere and it's going somewhere, right? So where is this going, and what are the consequences? And I will speak about this from, of course, I'm a Dominican, and I've been over 25 years as a social scientist, and I have done my work. Dominica is one of the places in the world that I've done my work over an extended period of time. I actually am the founder of a school-based curriculum I call Better Be Better You. Well, a youth-based curriculum I call Better Be Better You. So let me just tell you about the real data as a qualitative researcher and as an ethnographer that work with young people on a daily basis. When I have, and that may help to explain why we may have that disparity of about 70-something% graduation for women, and they're about 30-something%. So about maybe a 30 to 40% disparity in graduation rates at a place as our clubs. Right? Did I get that right, Sanford? Is that about the statistics? Sanford, did I get that right?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
I said from what I heard you say, because I was not thinking about statistics myself, that the graduation rate for women at the Dominica State College is about 70-something%, and for men it's about 30-something%. Is that right?
Well,
what did you say?
Close enough. It was like
no. I don't need to be close enough. I needed to be exact. So what is it? What is it?
To 24%.
What's it?
76 to 24.
76 to 24. Yes. Okay. So we did that's a big difference, right? So that is not a fluke, right? The important to be, and I don't know what year that is for. Say again?
It's like an average.
It was an average for how many? What year?
5
years. There's a feedback. I'm sorry, I can't hear what he says. There's a feedback. I'm not understanding what he's saying.
Yeah, it appears that he's having some technical issues. So when he's getting that corrected, Dr. Seja, you probably could explain on.
Yeah, so let's just assume for those figures, there is somewhere between a 44 and a 48% disparity that exists in graduation rates, right? It's around that, right? Right? We can even be conservative and say 40%. I mean, any figure like that is alarming. Any figure like that is not what I'd say is not for fluke, even if it were one a year. Now, what I was saying is that what I understand from the way when I teach workshops with young men and women in primary school, some of them in high school, and some of them already involved in tertiary education. I see the seeds that are planted from very young aspects of socialization. In the United States, they use the reading scores of fourth graders to determine how many prison beds will be there, right? Because if young boys and girls cannot read by standard by fourth grade, it's exponentially greater the probability that they'll end up in prison or in the wrong hands, right? And I noticed that in the reading, when I work with young boys and girls, when I have workshops and I ask for a volunteer to read, very seldom it is the boy. It is the boy when I call out on the boy. And most of the time that there's a volunteer, it would be a girl that would volunteer, right? Why would the girl volunteer? It seems that oftentimes the girl is more confident in the reading, or if she makes mistakes, she feels less inferior about the error that she makes. But whereas the boy ties it into his masculinity, and the boy's friends laugh at him more if he makes an error, but the girl's friends try to encourage her if she makes an error. As they become into high school years, some of the boys that drop out of school, I mean, there are some young boys in Dominica now. Actually, recently I had to take my vehicle and go drop a particular young boy to school because he refused to go. He's in fifth grade school. Wow. And his mother would call me in the United States telling me she's going to get the police to get him to go to school. And the little boy is bright. And when he goes to school, he creates a dynamic where the other boys around him will do their work. And when he doesn't go to school, the other boys in school are not even really doing the work. You understand? Right? And the young girl was his little younger sister, ready to go. She goes to school all the time. But this guy who's even more academically gifted than her doesn't want to go to school. I said, what are you going to do? He said, well, I can get a job as this, I can get a job as that, construction. And when I asked the young girls what they want to do, they almost always want to do something that was going to make their education necessary for them to get a job. And if they do not go to school, they do not have a backup plan, it's not very attractive to them. But the boys seem to think that there's a backup plan that's attractive, let them want to hustle and so on. But it's a misnomer, it's not real. And most of them end up in dire conditions. So this is the trajectory that I see. And then later on, as Joshua, hopefully we'll talk about and so on. But for me, empirically, I see a mindset that makes young boys to value the importance of education for a greater future, and I see where young girls are socialized where they see the value of education as a
Okay, very well. Before we proceed, it appears that we're getting a feedback from one of you. So if there's something that can be corrected, please do so we can get clarity in our audio. I'm not sure whether it's Facebook or one of us seems to have some feedback issues. But Dr. Seja, thank you. I'm not sure whether Mr. Sanford wants to add anything to as the causes for the differences in educational performance from childhood to adulthood.
Actually, I agree with him. What he said, it's not so much just a general issue, but it's an issue that starts from very young. In socialization, I believe our parenting aspect has to do a lot with that. So how we raise our children, how we grow them up, how they go through the entire school process, that it actually develops them mentally and their whole state of mind. So what he's saying is actually very, very true. Like that is a problem that starts from a very young age, and we need to work on that. We need to identify what the main issues are, and more research needs to be done and undertaken in regard to that statement. So our men are very demotivated. They need to find some sort of motivation, some parental backing, some attention. Something needs to change. And it's very
based on what you're saying, young Sanford, you're suggesting that the men are underperforming because of some failures in the family, failures in our institutions, and until we correct those failures, then men will continue to lag behind. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, that is I will not make that direct answer to that, but I believe more research needs to be done in order to prove that statement. But I believe so, yes, because like his points were very clear and they were very valid. Like some students, they are very demotivated. 9 times out of 10, you more find a female student raising their hand to answer a question, a male student, and it's not necessarily because the males feel nervous or anything like that. I feel they're just demotivated and they need some serious motivation, whether it is family based or whether it is institutionally based.
Okay, so we have to look at solutions moving forward because, of course, we've identified the problem already. Absence, real and raw data, it's clear that something is happening to our men. And we are looking at education. We are about to end that segment as far as the differences between performances of men and women at an educational level. And just to sum it up, it would appear that both of you gentlemen are suggesting to our followers that the main cause for the disparities between men and women educational attainment seem to originate from the family, the way in which the boys are socialized versus the girls are socialized. And of course, we didn't go into factors, but I also think that feminization of our educational system, the type of curriculum system that we have, may be more favorable to girls than boys. Of course, I do not have any science to prove that. And there's also the suggestion that biological factors or hereditary factors may be contributing factors as well. It is being suggested that women mature or girls mature faster than boys. And when a girl is 13 or 14, she already has a more settled mind as opposed to a boy who's still there trying to determine what he's about, what is his purpose. So at that level, it would appear that the girls outperform boys because the girls are more focused. These are just some of the possible causes for the differences in educational attainment between boys and girls.
Yeah, Mr. Francis, I would like to calibrate or recalibrate something that you said is a takeaway from the similarity in Mr. Sanford and my conclusion. And I would certainly like to clarify my own contribution regarding the statement you made about the importance of family as the major source. I want to make it very clear that I'm not saying that the disparity of education, the disparity of men performances in education and graduation rates, let's say in Dominica, or even anywhere in any other within criminal justice and other issues, point first to the family. What I will say is that first of all, it has to do with the way that society, the broad society is structured in terms of ideas about masculinity, right? About socialization of masculinity in the economy and in the workplace, right? The position of men and women in the home, right? And what the possibilities are, what makes a man, what makes a woman. And the ideas of society and the reproductions of society that seems to socialize men that in ways that education is not so important for them to be able to achieve in life as opposed to that of the women. So that's on the societal level on the more macro level. We have on the more meso level within the churches, within the families, within the organizations, within the sports clubs, those broad narratives being reproduced within the family, within the churches, and within the organizations. And of course, we have within the nucleus of the family itself, how are men and women socializing, and especially if we look at the trajectories of single-headed or double family or male-headed households, how does that impact in terms of how men see the value of what makes a man a man? And there's also on the individual level, the changes that someone can make. Because some people go up in very terrible situations and they end up doing exemplary for themselves. Mr. Weeks is an example of that. He would have been here to speak for himself, where he had to pull himself up by the bootstrap and is still doing this now. So I want to make sure that it's understood that I'm talking about on the individual level, the family level, the society, the community level, and also on the broad society and on the broad structure, not just focusing here on family.
Very well. Sanford, do you have anything to say? Do you want to sum up on education?
Oh, well, I agree with what he said. I support him 100%. In terms of the education, I still believe that there are a lot more things that could be done to help improve the performance of men. I like how you said that women mature faster than men, but I don't know. So I believe that they could add more extracurricular activities, more physical things that could more or less contribute towards the development of men within our education system, whether it be cricket, whether it be skills development more specifically, because we find that a lot more men actually do very well in those fields when it comes to more physical work. So a lot of those things, a lot of changes to the curriculum, a lot of more research should be done and invested into that aspect of it as well. Could due to the disparities between the male and female counterparts.
Very well. On that note, I just want to encourage our followers to participate, to ask questions, and to make comments. With me here is Dr. Seja and young Sanford, Claudie Sanford, the young economist, and Dr. Seja, of course, being a sociologist, physiologist. Did I say it right, Dr. Seja, as well as
sociologist, physiologist. Yeah, you said it right.
Right, very well. While you're on the note of education, I said that we're wrapping it up before we move on to another segment. But if you were to suggest to the policymakers, more so the Minister of Education, and the way forward for education in Dominica to get more boys involved and more motivated, and to work on the reduction of high school dropout rates, which seems to be a problem here, meaning that more and more boys are dropping out of high school. What would you suggest? I would suggest suggestions such as having more vocational programs, more technical programs. Dr. Seja, you have done quite a number of research in different areas. I'm not too sure whether you have done any research in the area of education and boys' educational attainment, but if you were to suggest to the government of Dominica on the way forward as far as boys' education, and lessening the disparity between boys and girls as far as attainment is concerned, what would be your suggestion?
Well, my suggestion would be to follow what I would call an ABC, what I call in physiology, an ABC formula. The ABC formula really is to acquire accurate understanding. We have a lot of prescription without proper diagnosis. You have a lot of people that assume that boys are not graduating because they're lazy, or because they're on drugs, or because of whatever. So there needs to be an accurate understanding of what is going on. And a lot of people believe they know what's going on, but trust me, you do not know. One of the things that Mr. Stanford can correct me on that if I'm wrong, one of the biggest challenges that young people face is that adults want to speak for them without speaking to them.
Yeah.
And then when they speak with them, they misunderstand what they say because the young people's language is a little bit different, and they see them as disrespectful, wanting to talk back. And at the end of the day, you end up arguing with them rather than listening to them. So that really has to stop. So we have to get accurate information from those very intelligent youth. Both of those young people are more intelligent than their parents. I mean, I'm not just talking about street smart, we're talking about cognitively because of how they've developed, all right? So we have to get accurate information. And the other thing is to realize that whenever there are problems, we want to come to quick solutions, but sometimes there are already things that are working that we are ignoring. We often focus on the deficit model to look at why is it that people are failing so much. But if you were to study men like Mr. Sanford and other of his peers, and to understand why is it that young men like Mr. Sanford and so on are graduating, and how can we make that even better? In fact, if we ask why the graduation rates not even worse among boys, and we were to study persons that include someone like Mr. Sanford, I have not asked you, so I do not know. But we might assume that he was born in the home with his mother and his father, his biological mother and his father. They've never had the life, they never had those changes in their life, they almost never had economic activity. I doubt that Mr. Sanford's story and everybody else's story might be here. So we have to get an accurate understanding. We have to understand things that are already working and to get them to work. I would say that right now, I would not say that education, especially primary education, high school education, seems to be a priority now for public policymakers in Dominica. And I say that because when you look at the place like the grammar school, and you look at the situation at the Goodman Secondary School, just as two examples, I don't know with all of the other buildings that are going around for housing and so on. I understand if there is as much priority placed on education as on housing, what explains the failure to have recently develop the Goodwill Junior High School and the students at grammar school using the outhouses and the porta johns. I understand that things are going on, but this housing revolution, where's the priority for education? I'm not saying that education is not taken seriously at all, but I think as if I were to advise policymakers, I would advise them that we need to probably invest more in developing our young persons at this primary and especially the high school level with the kind of infrastructure they need for proper education. Some of them going to school in the morning, some of them going to school in the afternoon. They use the same space, they get into fights with each other, problems in the communities, spill over on the school, and the teachers are not getting the proper training in the social problems that are there. And after a while, it becomes an access. After a while, it becomes very problematic. We as Dominicans value education. There has been a revolution in trying to get more Dominicans to go overseas to study and to open up the university for more Dominicans to study. That's a great thing. But we need to do better on those levels to prevent this problem from getting worse.
Okay, very well. Thank you. What about you, Sanford? Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, but before I make my direct suggestions, I'd like to point out how important it is that we do a lot more research before we make suggestions or recommendations, because in Dominica specifically, we have a serious drought in terms of research, in terms of information. So we need a lot more information to make very well-advised policy decisions. So to make any recommendation, before I get there, I would say that any policy made by any minister should have a lot more oversight. For example, if you put in place a policy on the education system, whether or not it is to put more male teachers or less female teachers, because I know you spoke about the feminization of the education system, we need to have a more oversight. So if you have a policy, you should put that policy in place for 2 years, and you should have someone that can actually monitor the success rate of that policy to know that whether or not it is being successful, whether or not the resources being put into those policies make a lot of sense, because without that information, there's a lot of wastage happening. So I believe that is very important to highlight before anybody makes any recommendations or any policy changes. There need to be more guidelines to the policies. So in terms of the recommendations, I did some reading, some research on the feminization of the education system, and there was a specific individual. His name was Ja. He underwent some research where he actually tested 7 different Caribbean countries, right? And he made some of them entirely female and some of them entirely male teachers to test the validity of whether or not the feminization of the education system had a real impact. But what he found that there was no major disparity. There was only a 1 or 2% difference. So it's not necessarily the feminization, but the actual teachers. Not to say that the teachers are doing a bad job, but their training and their skill set and their skill level and their ability to communicate to the children. Because in all instances, in his research, that the students performed well, whether or not it was a male or female teacher. So now for my betterment of the recommendations, because that was only one research, and we both know that everything changes based on society or culture. So I believe that one thing we could do in the education system is we could have a teachers within the education system. We also need to have a better curriculum. It must incorporate more courses, more programs that are more male-oriented and attractive and more skill-based, so it will attract more men and prevent male dropouts.
Okay, thank you so much.
Restructuring of the curriculum developing unit to include more technocrats from various sectors of the Dominican economy. And more specification that are gender neutral as well. Something that will more encourage both male and females to continue more physically within our education system. Okay, I'll end there.
Yeah,
Joshua, I know you have to facilitate our new colleague here, but I just want to say how proud I am and how impressed I am with Mr. Sanford. And it's very encouraging that a young scholar, a young man like his, is so attuned to the value of research. And not only is he aware of it, but he's making the effort. And I'm really impressed. I'm really impressed with you. And I look forward to having some more conversations with you. And as a university professor who has arrived at the pinnacle of my career in terms of the highest level, I mentor a whole lot of young people. So I even extend an opportunity, whatever advice I could be to you. I learn a lot from you. I want to learn from you as well. If there's anything that I could teach to you, I'd really love to, because I'm really impressed with your thoughts and the way you're thinking. And I really encourage that. Even if we're talking about the low percentage of performance, underperformance of men, I say the way that we improve the underperformance of men is to look at the good performance of men and build the model forward, right? So you are one of those trailblazers, and I really wanted to commend you and to take the opportunity. Host, sorry for jumping in, but I just thought that I wanted to get in to say that.
That's okay, and I appreciate that you have said that. And basically, you have just represented my sentiment. I believe the young man is very intelligent, and I'm very impressed, and I hope that his research continues and he continues to make a very valid contribution to Dominica. But I want to introduce Superintendent Weeks, and he came in just at the opportune time when we're going to talk about crimes, and which is also a baby of Dr. Sesha. Earlier on, I mentioned what is happening to our young men. When you look at the court system, basically the people who stand before the court, in the criminal jurisdiction in particular, are men. You look on the blocks, who do you see? Men. You have bike accidents, who do you see? Men. So it would appear that our men are in trouble with the law. And Superintendent Weeks has vast experience in policing. He's also a social activist in Dominica. Of course, he will say more to what he has done, but on the surface, we are fully aware that Superintendent Weeks has made a very significant contribution to Dominica, not just as a police officer, but in the area of spirituality. We know that he is a good example, he's a role model, and we want to hear his perspective on why more men are finding themselves in problems compared to women. And I want to make that point in the premise of what Dr. Sesha mentioned of earlier, when he said that more men standing before the court does not necessarily mean that less women are standing before the court, because you have to look at it from a percentage point of view. So let me just take the opportunity to welcome Superintendent Weeks. We are very happy to have you here. We want to welcome you on the platform. We have followers here, they are listening, and we just want to thank you and tell you that we are very grateful that you have made the time to come and speak to us.
And young joining late, given the technology. Technology is good, but sometimes a lot of issues to get on board. And it's also good to have a very good wife. She assisted me. So while we're talking about men and marginalization, but here it is, the woman is at my back. And then pumping in and ensuring that I'm not marginalized.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
So I'm really happy for that opportunity to join you all, Dr. Saint-Jean and young Sanford. I think it's the first time I've been in any kind of discussion or any forum with the youngster, and the little piece that I heard, his song is good. And we really continue to wish him well. Yes, for the listeners, and I'm sure many of them would know, I'm a 37-year veteran in the Commonwealth of Dominica Police Force, having joined in 1983. And I've worked in several areas of the police department, including the police academy, where I've trained police recruits and, of course, the senior programs for a very long time. The last time was 2018. I've done a lot of work in the courtroom as well, perhaps about 3/4 of my career prosecuting in the courts. Yes, from the spiritual background, I'm an itinerant evangelist. and I move around and minister the word of God. And I can say I'm just a humble human being making a contribution to bring glory to God and at the same time to develop humanity, and particularly in the Dominican jurisdiction. With respect to the general discussion on the marginalization of men, or where men are, I'm of the view that men indeed have shirked their responsibility, and I'm talking about, let us say, in contemporary times. My view is that many, many years ago, and I think somewhere along the discussion, I think it was you, Josh, who mentioned the graduates coming from law school, 98% of them are women, and that's true. You see people who do go to the University of the West Indies, Dominica campus, 95% are women. Men drop them and come on time to pick them up, at the same time not developing themselves educationally or otherwise. As it is now, I am of the view, and given my experience as a police officer, as we do investigations, as reports are being made, it would appear that men have spectacularly shirked their responsibility and have left it for the woman, quote unquote, to take care of the home, to take care of the economic development of the home, or the woman, as it were. Perhaps it's nothing wrong for a man to assist a woman in getting educated, or even in just the economic development, social development, etc. But it's as if no, it's quick cash. The faster you can get some money to the home, it is felt that makes you a man. And indeed, from that point, you realize that the men are basically, in my view too, are empty. Let us look at it from the spiritual perspective, from the churches, whatever evangelical or whatever it is. If a call is made for a particular ministry, you see, even in the churches, a good 75%, if not more, the churches are filled with women. So there's a lot of work to be done. And the major question, as we are all around the table discussing, is why is that so? What has caused that? What is the problem? And how do we get men to get back to the role, one, that the Creator has established for us, that we are the head of the home to give direction. We are the educator, the prophet, the soul there. All of it is to give direction to the home. And why have we shirked that responsibility? And I'm sure, by way of introduction, these are the questions I'll put forward as we develop the conversation on this platform.
Okay, very well, and we appreciate that. Thank you so much, Superintendent Weeks. As we said, we are happy to have you, and you came in just at the right time as we are going to explore men and, should I say criminology, Dr. Seja?
Well, just say social scientists, that's fine, because criminologists, sociologists, physiologists, and you know, so the titles get along. So social scientists is probably
cover everything.
Yeah, thank you. But I spoke about my own experience as an attorney. I've been practicing for the past 8 years. I have been doing criminal law, and I observed that the people who stand before the court generally are men. I do not have the data, but just my mere observation, my informal survey, which show that more men by far appear before the court. And that would be a manifestation of the dysfunctions that men are going through. Of course, we have looked at the family as a socializing unit. And when we discuss education and educational attainments, we will of the view that the manner in which boys are socialized versus girls may contribute to the reasons why more girls outgrow from boys. Could it be that the manner in which the family socializes the boys also predispose the boys to more criminal tendencies or propensities versus the girls? We'll allow the Superintendent Weeks to get the
the socialization is so very important. Yes, the family, the primary block, the primary social agency. I mean, take it from the courts. You and I are always at the court, and you mentioned about more men. I want to, while you say more men, we see an increase. Granted, we don't have the data, and statistics are so critical and would be helpful to the discussion that we're having now. If we had to look at empirical data, perhaps would be in a better position, perhaps instead of generalizing. But then informally, we know for that point that we see more men and more young men for that part, juvenile and early teens who are coming to the court. What's the reason for that? It comes back to in my view, to the primary social agency and that family. Where most families are no longer the nuclear family, which is really the cornerstone of the society, of the jurisdiction, and many single parents, and the difficulty economically, socially, and otherwise for these kinds of families. And as such, we see our young men basically going astray. Perhaps this point brings me right into the new development, or a refreshed development, with respect to the behavior, juvenile delinquency and deviance by our youngsters. And I'm talking about our school children, particularly the secondary school children. It does not necessarily say many of them are not socialized properly. I'm sure that there are great parents who impact good manners, good mannerisms, and so to the youngsters. But there are so many factors, so many variables that we would have to bring to the fore to see, if at all, that we can point our finger on the culprit, or one or two of the culprits that's causing the problem in the society today. I mean, I can tell you, just only last week, we had to deal with a 15-year-old, if you're talking about marginalization of men, and Dr. Seja, that should interest you. And he was involved in some deviant behavior, fighting, throwing stones, may have damaged vehicles, etc. And when we brought him in, and we know we have the Children and Young Persons Act, so from the time he enters police headquarters, there's a particular way to deal with that youngster. And when we made contact with one of the parents, that's the mother, she categorically said that I do not know what to do. I just don't know what to do. And I perceive that she has just totally given up on this young man. And I think it was one of his older siblings who had to come in to represent him, because without the presence of an adult or a very senior police officer to go through the normal protocol, given what the legislation stipulates, it means we would be operating ultra vires. We would not be following the law in dealing with him, even if he reaches the board. How do you reconcile that with a parent? We come to socialization now, the primary social agency. The mother has given up. It's left to the secondary agencies. Now we come to the police force, police investigators, who are not always, apart from the law and initial training, but who does not always have a general understanding of how to deal with these issues. And I can attest to that, that it's a fact. I mean, yes, we go through the law, but for a few of us who really understand deviance, have an idea from a sociological, criminological perspective, because yes, from a legal standpoint, you're dealing with this young person, but he needs to be rehabilitated. He needs to be reintegrated. He needs to be reconciled with the society. And how do we deal with him? So it's a lot of issues, a cocktail of issues. And I am one of those who have really stood up and over the years have been saying the proper socialization of the children. And it sickens me when families, whether mother, father, the nuclear family or extended family, and they have really given up and said, I do not know what to do.
Wow. Yeah, thank you, Superintendent Weeks. I think you called on the social scientist, Dr. Seja, to respond to that question as to why is it that our boys seem to be deviant or more delinquent. And of course, we'll hear from young Sanford as well in terms of his research. So, Dr. Seja, you heard Superintendent Weeks as far as young men finding themselves in criminal problems. What would be the main cause or causes of that?
Yes, before I answer this, one of my friends, I'm also streaming live on Facebook because I put the link for Facebook, but it doesn't seem that the link for Facebook is capturing the YouTube, and some people having some problems, so I'm doing a live here as well. And one of the followers, I mistakenly, I called our discussion dealing with gender issues, right? Because I'm male related to gender. But it apparently might be a mischaracterization. One of the women, a woman, Emma Daniel, as she is referred to here on Facebook, indicated that, there's a gender discussion without a woman on the panel. And then I responded by saying that I could have mischaracterized the title because it's about the marginalization of men. But even I too would have welcomed the presence of a woman on the panel, even if we speak about the marginalization of men, because that's sometimes the mistake and the problem that we make. We sometimes speak for others. And even if we are speaking about situations that relate to underproductivity by men, we assume that overproductivity by men or by women, that we can speak on that. So I think we have to slap ourselves on the wrist. I'm not gonna blame the the host, because I could have asked if they were women as well. If I could have helped to do that. But nonetheless, we are where we are, and I think I can't say what anybody else should do, but I will apologize myself to women who may feel marginalized, that they are being marginalized because we have a show about marginalization with gender issue that has marginalized women and not included them. I'm not going to blame the host because I'm a participant there. I apologize for that, but I think as much as possible, we should even try to involve the voices of women to help us understand this issue. And I'd be happy for us to make amends and probably come back and discuss the involvement of women by all means, because I love greatly the contribution of the sensibility of women, because women always bring such great perspective for everything in society. So that's my take on that, Emma. I understand. Very good point. Regarding the issue of why there are so many boys overrepresented in Dominica, I think that I will understand. I put on my criminological hat, and I will say that if we are to understand this appropriately, we need to understand what types of crimes are predominantly committed in Dominica, and how are those crimes linked to the gender socialization and this issue of how gender relates to society. And I'm not looking at the statistics directly here to tell you year by year, but I know that somewhere between 70 to 72 to 82%, depending on the year that you're talking about, of indictable crimes, right? We have summary offenses, so we can talk about summary offenses, but let's just talk about indictable offenses that are the more serious offenses. Somewhere between the 70s to the 80s, depending on what year you're talking about, of those crimes are burglaries, right? They're burglaries. Burglaries basically carry the largest volume of crimes reported to the police in Dominica for a long period of time. We have other crimes that are numerous, such as robberies. We have taking conveyance. We have grievous bodily harms and those types of crimes, but they pale in comparison in numbers, right? So if we were just to look at that burglary alone, because it carries such a big part of the picture, we would say, well, who's likely to burglarize more? A boy or girl? A man or a woman? And why? Right? And we can find answers to that. You know, going even where I was talking to someone today whose home was burglarized. Someone came through the window, went into the back, slipped through the person's home, stole the jewelry, and someone had to jump down to get in, get out. The robberies, you know, the taking conveyance. This type of activities that seem to need take a lot of boldness, that take a lot of sometimes recklessness doesn't mean that women cannot be bold and reckless, but we would have to question what criminologists would do is to say what are the predominant crimes and how does that relate to gender socialization, right? In terms of taking from people something that does not belong to you. Theft, I mean, on the summary matters, theft are very, very high as well, right? So what is it about the mindset of boys and men as opposed to women and girls that seems to make it more socially acceptable or more willing by them to be going into someone's home and take something that does not belong to them? The way that we socialize men and women, are women willing to take that chance? Are girls willing to take that chance as much as men and boys are willing to take that chance? So if we're talking now, we can talk about other factors, but if we're talking about gender issues and disproportionality, we need to look at this, right? There are other crimes, and if we were to look at crimes that are more committed by women, those, I mean, it doesn't mean that women do not burglarize and get involved in robberies as well, but there are other crimes that are more frequent and common in the undertaking. So that is an important thing, that we have to look at the profile of the crime and to think of the gender cause in that regard. We can speculate and overlay that with anybody, whether it's a man or a woman who chooses to burglarize or who chooses to rob. Why would they do so? We can talk about that. But I just wanted to introduce that, you know, as a small caveat in terms of how we would make sense of that as social science.
Yeah, very well. Yes.
Okay, well, I'm glad that we identified the issue, which was having more men committing crimes than women. That is the issue that we have just identified. And well, I guess it is very important to recognize the family and the social aspect at which most men are groomed. A lot of men are groomed to be, like we said before, macho. We are more built to control or conceal our feelings and stuff like that. So we would understand why a lot more men would lash out in different situations than women, because women are taught more or less to openly express themselves and communicate. Now, one problem that I would like to highlight when it comes to men would be alcoholism, because I think that is a main problem in Dominica specifically, and one that is very much undertaken by the large majority of men in comparison to women. And it usually ends badly in most instances. And what have we really done to correct that issue? Because in all cases, a lot of people have actually recognized this problem, and the government has actually taken upon it themselves to actually put policies in place to resolve these issues. Because a lot of alcoholism leads to a lot of family issues which reflect upon our children, and then it becomes a cycle. Which brings me back to my previous point, where it comes to policy supervision. Like, for example, a lot of the policies we have, a lot of the solutions to the problems that we have is tax it. So alcoholism being a problem, tax it, right? So we add a tax on alcoholism, but who really monitors the difference? So let's say if we have a 10% tax on alcohol, who actually says that there was a decrease in the consumption of alcohol? Because if we actually, like, let me throw in some economics. The inelasticity of a product being alcohol. If it has a low inelasticity, then your demand almost remains the same, or it has a high inelasticity. So it's very important to monitor our policies, especially like the tax policies that we tend to fall back on a lot. So putting tax on, let's say, alcohol without monitoring, like with 1 to 3 years to actually see the result of that tax is an issue. So alcoholism, I believe, is a very important issue where that actually reflects very poorly on our men. We can see it every day, every night when we see a lot more men drinking and abusing alcohol, and then to the family. And so it's very important that we recognize these issues and understand why they are happening and make better policies. That, I believe you guys actually covered the vast majority of the issues and recommendations. So I would just support what Senja said.
Okay, very well. Any one of your gentlemen want to add further to what may be the possible causes for the predisposition of men to commit crimes? Are there any scientific proof that diet contributes towards men's propensity to commit crimes?
Well, Lombroso said, and I'm sure the professor would agree with that. Lombroso said he talked about the different features of men and of man in terms of committing crime. But scientifically, if you look at other things, and Sanford is correct as he preferred alcoholism or drugs. A lot of people say poverty. A lot of people say lack of facilities so that particularly young guys, young men, would exert their energy in whatever discipline in terms of sports. The dysfunctional family. So many factors or variables can be pointed out. But he made an interesting point on alcoholism, and then I slip in poverty. Does it always say that a person who is poor, you've grown up in the stench of poverty, that it is inevitable or mandatory that you are very likely to commit crime? And the answer, in my view, is no. Josh, when we spoke in the week, and you know my background, there are many of us who've come from the bowels of poverty, the stench of poverty and destitution, and we became good citizens. We got a sound education. We thank God for that. In my case, and Dr. Senja, that too I've discussed with you, I grew up with a mom who had been mentally ill. So we're talking about poverty. On many occasions had been institutionalized at the mental hospital. It was in the APU then. It was kept at the Stock Farm prisons. There was a separation between the prison and the mentally ill people, men and women who were placed in that building, and I was basically left on the streets to survive. I had to learn to struggle early, learn to fight early, learn to get through the systems, and of course marginalization. So we're talking about marginalization of men, and indeed you are cast, you have become an outcast as a young boy. And look at me today. I think this is a manifest example, and that we give God glory for, that I did not become dysfunctional. And that's why I put it on myself, and I can cite myself as that testimony that is not always the family who has grown in the stench of destitution or poverty that would commit crime. Because conversely, I may say the rich people committing crime, and whether white collar, as it were, or the same burglary Dr. Senja talk about, or any other crime for that matter, whether summary or felonious, as it were. So yes, poverty is a factor. You need to eat, you need to get something on the family. So the likelihood, the probability of crossing the ocean, the channel, to peddle drugs, that's a high possibility, or burglarizing or stealing. Maybe the case of a woman, we don't have a woman on panel, the likelihood of prostitution or early prostitution, this is very likely. But I may argue, conversely, that it is not always so. Yes, a lesser percentage, not everyone. So alcoholism. In terms of villages today, and I'm sure those on Facebook listening and all of us on the platform, almost every village has a lab. And I'm not talking about a scientific lab where blood tests and other medical things are being done. I'm talking about an alcoholic lab. So, for example, in my community, in my parish where I grew up, I know there's a lab in the center of the Maho area. I'm not sure if it's now defunct or demolished, but I see young guys. We played football together. We played cricket together. Right guys in school, but they have made the lab the permanent place of abode. You see them, I think one of you mentioned in the very early mornings from 4 or 5 o'clock, and these guys are already in a drunken stupor. Young guys, 30 years, 45 years, their face is swollen, and disfigured, misshapen, and yes, Joshua, they are in the court. They're in the courtroom for, and many times, not very major crimes, incidentally. Summary offenses, perhaps throwing of stones, malicious damage. They need a little rum and do those things. So, yes, alcoholism, how do we address that? Well, may I suggest a few recommendations, and I've been saying that over the years. I like to hit at the village council, local government. Local government in this country ought not only to focus on fixing a paved road, getting a few bags of cement and fixing a road. I believe local government, it needs to be empowered. Local government from a local jurisdiction. So your role, apart from infrastructural development, roads, fences, and so on, but we need to empower our people, particularly our young boys and girls, so they too can get to the schools. They can have town hall meetings, get resource people. So, like Dr. says, police, as we about giving another jab, not a vaccination or inoculation jab, but another jab to community policing, so that we can help to deter or minimize the impact of criminality in our country. So the village councils, they have a great part to play to empower our young people. Yes, we have the cadet corps, we have the scouts, we have a few youth groups. Youth groups are almost non-existent in the communities. When we grew up, I don't know for Dr. Serge about Josh, and then we have the young man, maybe he can do that. Youth groups, we have progressive youth groups in many of the villages, and primary school and secondary school, boys and girls, and then you have the seniors and the village, helping and empowering our young people and helping to socialize. So we become the secondary agencies, and we looked out for our children. Today, basically, that's not existent, and you hear people say that, well, fine, I do not know what to do. And this young man, yes, will say, well, girls are socialized in a particular way or not, but I want to remind us, if we don't know, but I just want to remind us, girls are keeping up spectacularly to the boys too, because Joshua, you know, they are in the court as well. They are violent as well. The proceeds of burglaries and other types where there are benefits in crime, gain in crime, the girls and families, they do share in that. So while the girls are not breaking and getting into the windows or getting into the windows, but they are recipients of the proceeds of crime and the family. So it's right or wrong, they're settled. Let me quickly go before Dr. Sergio Sanford comes in. Yeah, there's a church today where the family, the husband, the wife, the nuclear family, or even the extended family, many years ago when you would have gone into the tabernacle or the building, the church service, whether the evangelical or the Roman Catholic Church. Children, they have to enter that church before their parents or together with their parents. Parents are in church and children are out. Let us bring our pastors and priests on the spot. That's not been addressed. A few of us may be addressing it, but that's not been addressed on the pulpit. That's not being addressed because all of the children, a good 80% of the children go out. The pastor is preaching or the worship is going on, and children are out and they're having their own way, and parents are seated. I know if we had to go out, tell me about it. Your parent, your aunt, your guardian, the acolytes, whoever it is, and you put yourself in, you have to be in. What has really happened? Why have we given up? We can't give up because the young men and women, we're talking about marginalization, and we have, as I said, the women are catching up with our guys, and I'm talking particularly the young women. We just cannot give up because for posterity, they are the ones that you and I, Dr. Sergio, Josh, we have to pass the baton. And are we going to pass the baton to dysfunctional people? Is that what the pillars of our society? Is that what is going to be built on? We really need not to give up. And yes, parents, the family, and the other social agencies, we really have a lot of work to do. And I think what a best time in the year of revival, despite all of the challenges and the vicissitudes of life, the challenges that we have, I think we ought not to give up and look at the best way strategically to deal with the issues.
Very well, very well. Any one of you gentlemen can go ahead.
Okay, I'd just like to say that I support a lot of the stuff that he said, especially when it came to the part about church, because I myself, I'm guilty. I don't go to church as much as I would like to. When you speak about the extracurricular activities for men, because like you said, every community has a lab, has a place where a lot of the young people go and commute and drink and have fun. I'd like to bring up my previous point and just add some accountability there, because a lot of the solutions to the alcoholism right now would be taxes. So let's talk about the accountability of those funds and the proper resource distribution or allocation, right? So as a young person, let's talk about the benefits of doing an extracurricular activity versus going to a rum shop and having fun, right? Because either way, as a young person, you would have fun, whether you go to play a sport or whether you go to the rum shop. At the end of the day, I would assume that you have fun, you enjoy your day, you go to bed. So bringing back the accountability of funds, let's say the taxes that we implement to prevent the alcoholism, whether it's 10%. What if we just took like half of that, like that's about 5% of that 10% tax, and we put it towards extracurricular activities? That way we have some level of accountability of those taxes and we actually solve that problem. So if I would have fun today by playing football or have fun today by going in a rum shop, let's assume that our football association added more money to the prize pool or more suitable accountability in that regard. So instead of just going to the either way I'm going to have fun, you would add more of a benefit to doing something more productive. You'd probably give like small salaries or more competition, more stuff that more people can get involved with, so that their preference would be more physically and more productively inclined than going to a rum shop or going towards any other drug or anything like that. You need to make it more presentable, more attractive for young people to actually pursue that, if you understand where I'm getting at, right? And that would bring a lot more accountability of resources and funds and resource allocation. I'd just like to add that to support in what you were saying. You can go ahead, Doctor.
Very well. Yes, Dr. Sesha.
Yes, and host, I would ask, I was practicing it here, and hopefully with the technical feedback, if everybody could mute their mics when the other is speaking, that would probably be very helpful. I tried that for this previous point, and I must say, Mr. Francis, I guess at some point you probably will explain to the viewers, because they're still struggling to understand why there was not a female perspective added. So I'll let you. I can't answer for you, especially I can't defend you. You are the jurist here. But so we can get to that, but I want to make sure that we respond to some of those. Although I have told people that I probably mischaracterized because it's more about the marginalization of the performance of men. But still, as one said, the perspective of a woman will be great. But
Yes.
so let me talk about this beyond saying that we need to look at the most populous crime, or sort of crimes in question, because if we were to talk about domestic violence, or we were to talk about sexual molestation, or we probably were to talk about some petty theft, maybe the profile, or the gender profile would probably be different, right? Or forgery or embezzlement and so on. Maybe those crimes would be more populated with women, or prostitution. Some of those crimes would probably be more, or drug dealing will be populated with women. But aside from that, I think it's important for us to understand that when we speak about criminality, there are various broad things to understand. Number one, a crime happens primarily when three things are present. Number one, there's a motivated offender. Number two, there is a suitable target, right? And there's a location that oftentimes there is not what we call a capable guardian. So somebody must want to break the law. And we say that ignorance of the law is no excuse, right? So you should know you're not supposed to kill people and steal. So we just assume that everybody knows the right from wrong, except there are little things about stuff on the internet and the speed, and there are various things that we may not know. But so assuming that, why would someone be motivated to do that action, especially knowing it breaks the law, right? And why would that motivation be more disproportionate among boys as opposed to girls? Number two, if one wants to commit a crime, what is going to be the most suitable target, right? What is going to be the location where they will go? Who are they going to get it from? How will their personality, their biology, their perceptions about life, who owes them something, their sense of entitlement, how will that affect where they go to do what they do? And number three, the location they go, the target that they choose, how likely is that target able to resist? If they come to your home, how well is your home burglar proof? If they have a fight with you, to what extent can you de-escalate the fight with your words or with your action, right? If it were something that would to do with rape or something that would to do with robbery, how can the victim reduce the motivation of the offender, right? So it is not just a simple issue where someone wants to commit a crime and they just commit a crime. There is a location, and sometimes victims play active roles in their own perpetration. And Mr. Woods will tell you a lot of the times the people that end up dead in the fight, and Josh Reno has been in the courts, are not the people who actually were the ones who started the fight. So the fight you begin is sometimes just to lose, right? So we have a motivated offender, we have a suitable target, we have the absence of a capable guardian. What makes someone motivated to want to commit a crime? The first set of theories that came beyond the idea that people are demons, like Cesar Labrasso, as Mr. Wick said, argued that the human skull could tell us, if you went and you looked at someone's skull and you manipulated the skull, you could tell that they are genetic throwbacks, and you could tell from the shape of the skull the likelihood of criminality or not, right? That was some of the first biological ideas. We have Sheldon that argues about body types. We have the ectomorph, we have the endomorph, we have the mesomorph, the skin and the skin guy, the thin guy, like the one that entered into my colleague's place. He was not. He probably was not even my size because I couldn't fit in that window. The small, the wiry person that can run fast is more likely to be a burglar. Sheldon argued that a sex offender, a pedophile, is usually very calm, quiet, nice. They are usually jolly and round, right? They usually have the personalities that will give candies to children and be nice people. When you find out, that's the way they lure the way. And he said that the mesomorph, which is the big tough guy, is more likely to be involved in bar fights and so on. But then we have other types of psychological issues. We have the prefrontal lobe of the mind is the executive function of the brain. That is like the parent at home. So if you have no parents at home, kids go wild. So if you have people whose prefrontal lobes are inhibited, whether it's through alcohol or trauma to their lives, accidents and things like that, these are people that may not be able to think so clearly and calculate so clearly about controlling their activity. The classical theories tell us that human beings commit crimes when they weigh the cost and the benefit. The assumption is that human beings are rational actors who choose the cost and benefit of the actions, and when the cost seems higher, they are more likely to offend. Well, when the costs are higher, the benefits. When the costs are higher, they're less likely to offend, and when the benefits are higher, they're more likely to offend with more benefits. They're less likely to offend with less costs. So if they and they argue that punishment is what is going to really curtail human behavior, because the punishment fits the crime, and the punishment has to be three things. Punishment must be swift, it must be certain, it must be severe. You do it right away, you can get it, you certain every time you do it, and there must not be disparity in the enforcement of the law for the bourgeois or the poor, or for one or the other, one party or the next. If it is evenly and justly dispensed, there's a greater probability, right, of that occurring. But then we have the neoclassical theories that said not all human beings are rational actors that can choose the cost and benefit of the actions. That is to say that a child, someone who has not arrived at the age of good reasoning, someone who may have like battered women syndrome or battered man syndrome or PTSD, or some people have social traumas, that we have to account for those things. And then we have the positivists that tell us we must do science and we must look at those issues. There are a bunch of other theories, but I won't get into them. But theories are important because they help us to organize. Theories are abstract, but they also relate to reality. They may not be perfect every time, but they help us have some sort of ideas. When I wrote the book, Pockets of Lessons from Grand Day, and my second book, Pockets of Crime, and the recent articles that I've published, I used the empirical data to juxtapose theory, and I developed my own theories to help us understand. That's why I ended up creating Pisology, because the social problems paradigm tells us a lot about how people fail and how bad things happen. So we go about and we say, why is there so much violence? And what can we find about violence so we can kill it? And then what we do, there's a simple law of physics that energy follows attention. What we resist persists. So we find that the war on drugs, the war on this, and the war on that, things get worse. Why? Because what we resist persists. So in Pisology, I have created the idea that in addition to saying, why are things so bad, we need to ask, very importantly, Joshua, why aren't things even worse? Why aren't the young men in Dominica, even worse off than they are? I'm not saying that it's not bad enough in terms of the performance. And then when we ask why aren't things even worse, we can understand some of the things that in spite of our difficulties and in spite of the conditions, that we can understand of how to make things better. Because when we study the problems, we know more about the problems, but when we study where the problem is not, we learn more about the solutions. So that is why I advocate this shift away from just a deficit thinking of how we fail to the more asset-based approach of how we succeed, like what I introduced in Pisology.
Okay, very well. We got some very interesting perspectives here. Of course, we did not really go into details with any one possible cause for crime, juvenile delinquency, deviance, as Superintendent Wicks put it. We didn't discuss whether mass media is having any impact on our young men, cultural penetration, the type of music that the young people listen to, whether that music to some extent encourages people or incite young people to misbehave. We spent a lot of time on the family, and of course there was some discussion about secularization. Well, we would say that men are less God-fearing, and probably that makes us a little bit more inclined to disobey the law. I'm not too sure whether the scientist, the social scientist, Dr. Serja, would take that part of our upbringing into consideration. Because of course, in the modern world, we tend to deviate from spirituality. We tend to treat it as unscientific as far as our faith. I do not know whether any study has proven that those of us who are more faithful, those of us who are more religious, are less inclined to commit crimes. But again, as you say, in making conclusions, we need the science. And I am not too sure whether the scientists take that into consideration, but clearly the family, the education, poverty, I'm not too sure whether the studies have shown there's a positive correlation or nexus between between crimes and poverty. And then even when we talk about crimes, there's a difference between blue-collar crimes and white-collar crimes. Is it that the people who appear before the court are just the less fortunate, that they're poor, and the white-collar criminals get away? You know, so all those questions we ask in context of the disparity between men and women. But both Dr. Seja and Superintendent Weeks made the observation that while we have seen an increasing number of women getting education and, you know, climbing the educational ladder, we are also seeing an increasing number of women appearing before the court. So that's an interesting phenomenon where it may not be a difference between men and women as far as crimes. It may just be a general decay of our society, secularization. Okay, man, we have been around for some time. Dr. Seja, you have had some friends who raised the issue of why is it that we do not have a female on the platform? And thank you for giving me the opportunity. Well, I'm going to take the opportunity to speak to that. I hatched this idea of marginalization of men in the 11th hour. And I was basically looking for panelists. I did contact a female who was unavailable. And even up to the last minute, young Sanford made himself available. So to remedy the situation, on the next occasion, we're going to have part 2 to the discussion. And on that note, we'll be able to have a couple of female panelists who will draw or weigh on the subject from a female's perspective. Of course, we have quite a number of talented and qualified women who can speak to the issue, and we would like to hear the perspectives. So I want to apologize to our women for the absence of women on the panel. But we have had 3 very intelligent men here. Just to remind those who just joined us, we have Dr. Seja, a social scientist, we have Superintendent Weeks, and we have Claudia Sanford, the son of Claudia Sanford, who is an economics major, and clearly he's well learned in the area of social science. And also we have had a very interesting program. We can't stay with you all night long. We are looking for your comments. If you have any questions, you can go ahead to ask any of the panelists a question. We are going to hang out here for another 10 minutes, and I'm going to give each of the panelists an opportunity to wrap up. And as I said, hopefully on the next occasion, we can have part 2, and then we'll be able to correct the deficiency tonight in that we did not have a female panelist. I'm sure the social scientist here, Dr. Seja, would be very pleased with that. Yes, so, you know, of course, we can explore many other areas as far as the discussion is concerned, but at this hour, I'm just going to allow each of the panelists to speak to the issue on the way forward in terms of what we can do to help reverse what some of us think is the marginalization of men. I certainly believe that men have been marginalized. Regardless of how you define marginalization, I believe that men have lost certain traditional roles to their detriment, and to the detriment of the family, and to the detriment of society at large. Yes. I think that Sanford was making a point. Were you making a point, Sam?
Sorry, I was just having some technical difficulties. You can continue.
Yes, I was just saying that we will wrap up. Basically, you could speak to the issue from whatever perspective you desire, particularly on the way forward. One of the observations that I have made in Dominica, and I'm very profoundly concerned about it, is the high school dropout rate of our boys. You know, when you're a young man, you are raised in poverty, and things are hard for you and your family, and you're granted the opportunity to attain education, and you don't have the family support, you do not have the teacher support, you're under 15 years old, and you drop out of high school. What are the authorities doing about that? And probably Superintendent Weeks can tell us from his experience whether the police really get involved, because under the Education Act of Dominica, a child who's under 15 years old ought to be at school. And if that child drops out of high school, then the police or the authorities should get involved. And the parents of that child can be brought before the court to answer to a charge. So that I'm about, well, one of many things. And I would like to hear the perspective of the panelists on the way forward to keep our young men at school, particularly those who are mandated to be at school under the Education Act.
What a child, yes, I hope, am I clear?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, good. Children, I mean, under 15, since you ought to be in school, you really ought to be in school. And the Education Act, although there's much talk about it, I think it's a relevant piece of legislation with regard to the whole issue of education, children, what happens in the school, deviance, and all of this. And it's interesting that you talk about boys and girls in relation to school. I remember many years ago going to the Dominica Grammar School. Of course, there was no Education Act because that just came in, let's say, a couple of years ago. And in those days, Dr. Sergio, when you did not pay school fees, unless that money would come in, you would be out. And I remember in the late 70s, even when I would have made my impassioned plea to the then principal, he would have booted me out of school, despite the fact that I would have told him that and it's significant what I'm saying, that I was a welfare child, because given the poverty and the destitution, the welfare kicked in. And it's only when the monies would have been paid, then I would have gotten back into school. No, if we're talking about marginalization, if we're talking about why young boys are no longer at school and why they are so much in deviant behavior, that's a great example I could have been in relation to that, whether permanent fixture at the state penitentiary, to wit, the stock from prison, or involved in drugs or any other kind of crime. And I want to tie that with respect to the individual. I believe in God. I believe God can do marvelous things. And I like to cite the example for myself. I've spoken in many fora, and especially young people all over the island, and I've given them my testimonies. And I have seen, by virtue of my testimony that I would have articulated, that I would have given to them, I've seen changes. I've seen them come to my office. They've written to me, and when they thought that they would have had it so bad, that indeed there was somebody who had it even worse and survived. So I know we're about closing, but what I can suggest to young boys, and especially where particularly that father figure, in my case, not knowing my father, I've never seen him, don't have a clue about him. I don't know if he's an abolo. I don't have a clue about him. It does not necessarily mean whether you may be poor, whether there's a particular lack in the family, that you should take the wrong way. If we're looking about solutions, or if I'm to encourage or inspire and parents, I see a number of people who are linked up to us and listening otherwise, that does not necessarily mean that you should take the wrong way. I didn't take the wrong way. I said earlier on in the genesis of the discussion that my mom had been institutionalized at the mental hospital for several years, and we were really left alone. It was a tough struggle, but I can tell you the desire to achieve, the desire to get an education, the desire to emerge, to get out from the rags and ashes of poverty, and not to stick along or gravitate towards marginalization or to doing the wrong things. That burning desire and unquenchable thirst had been there. And so our young people, and just in case you may be in that position or had been in this position, you can make amends. You can redeem yourself. There's no need to get into crime, even if you're a single parent. Your parent, you came from a single parent home. Even if you've been before the court as a juvenile, that does not necessarily say the rest of your life must be precipitated into criminal activity. I am of the view that education is important. That can help you, and with a good, sound spiritual background, it can bring transformation and your thinking. And I will conclude, because I think it was Joshua, one of you mentioned, if somebody is spiritually inclined or connected to the Lord, and I want to agree. If there's a healthy fear of the Lord from individuals, singly or corporately and nationally, we'll see a difference, because the Bible is clear. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, repent of their sins, change their ways, and submit, things will change. The land will be healed. Things will be better, to put it simply. So there has to be, for a nation, righteousness and exalt of a nation. For a nation, and that is inclusive of our young people, whether they are dysfunctional, whether they're going the wrong way. But if a nation, and I believe right now, as I conclude, I think Dominica is ripe for national repentance, as it were. We've taken a lot of things for granted, and a lot of things that are emerging, whether it's juvenile delinquency, whether it's fights, whether it's crime, whether it's our general behavior and attitude. I think it's the mindset. We have to reconfigure our mental furniture so that, yes, inevitably there will be conflict, there will be crimes, but we'll be in a better position to manage it.
Thank you, Superintendent Weeks. Thank you. We're so happy to have you here, speaking to us from a very general perspective. You two sound like a professor. From the scientist here, Dr. Seja, could open a door for you to be some kind of visiting professor at his university.
I spoke to him about it, Josh. I spoke to him about it. I spoke to Dr. Seja. In fact, he has also identified that. Well, I'm an adjunct professor. In fact, I had the opportunity to teach at UWI for about 4 years. They had a criminology program going there. So I can identify at a lower level, given the professorship of Dr. Seja and also the state college. In fact, I taught the law program at the Leeds Institute. And today I'm really blessed to know that Miss Jean-Jacques, who had been called to the bar just about 6 weeks ago, and I was a adjunct lecturer there. So I thank God, given the background that I've shared with the general public and on this platform, from where I could have been a jailbird, to put it, simply, and that I could make a contribution to national development.
Thank you so much,
Mr. President. Just so you know, I've also expressed my confidence in Mr. Wicks's knowledge, his intelligence, and his articulation, and I've encouraged him to meet the minimum standard of a master's degree to be able to get gainful employment in my university as an adjunct. And as the chair of my department, I actually single-handedly bring adjuncts to the first level, and then my dean and provost would interview, and I have not had one rejection of all the people that brought through, because I set a standard that I believe if Mr. Wicks was so qualified that he would have met otherwise.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Seja. Well, I'm going to allow Claudia Sanford to wrap up. We'll end with Dr. Seja basically to bring the curtains down on the this discussion. Let me just inform our followers that we will be back with part 2, and on that program, we definitely will have female panelists. Before we just wrap it up for the night, we'll probably take note of 1 or 2 comments which were made by our followers. But I want to go ahead with Claudia Sanford, allow him to wrap up his contribution on the subject here this evening.
All right, well, let me just acknowledge that this program, in my opinion, is an extremely good idea, because finally someone has decided to start the conversation, the marginalization of our men, or our young men and elder men in Dominica. That is a very good start. I believe that this conversation can lead to a lot more development and a lot more policies in regard to that. I believe that everyone here is very educated, and you all had a lot of very good points. In terms of solutions for this problem, I think we actually discussed quite a few of them, and I hope they did not fall on deaf ears to the point of this panel to start the very, very big conversation, very important conversation, I should say. So, solutions, my recommendations would probably be to put more resources into a lot of the extracurricular activities, in schools as well, more skill-based or more skill-oriented opportunities or courses or classes. Some more activities to more or less encourage our men to stay on track, not to get diverted. So I hope we continue this conversation, and everybody else, thank you for coming. And I really enjoyed the topic and this discussion. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're happy to have had you, Sanford. I must advise you that a number of our followers actually give you recommendations. They are marveled that you, as a young man, you are intellectually inclined to have that kind of conversation and to basically pave the way for our younger men to follow your steps. So continue to shine. And thank you so much. Well, Dr. Sesha, the scientist, the social scientist, we would like you to wrap up the conversation here for us on the whole issue of marginalization of men. Of course, we heard Superintendent Weeks, such an inspiring gentleman, and a young, inspiring man, Claudia Sanford. And now we're about to hear Dr. Sesha, a social scientist, who continues to make a very meaningful contribution to the intellectual, social, and economic landscape and the region by extension. So Dr. Sesha, yes, can you just wrap up the discussion here in terms of the way forward for young men in particular?
Well, thank you for this opportunity. And I want to tell you, Joshua, that Emma Danielle, who is the one on the chat, who was the first one that raised the shortcoming of the short sight of having a woman on panel, I asked her if she would be willing to be a guest for the show to follow up, including women, and she has agreed. So she has agreed here. I will send you her contact information. I think she'll be an excellent source, a community leader herself. She grew up in the village of Trafalgar like me. She has lived in the United States. She is a mother of many, I believe, actually, well, I won't get into the details of otherwise, but so she said yes, so I will provide you with that information. Somebody was wondering if I was ducking Emma. I don't know what that means, but hopefully we give her that opportunity so she can lend a voice. She made a good point. Rasmo also said, you probably know who Rasmo is, that the academic and on the performance of males in Dominica and crime by males are a result of sexism. Marginalization is a result of those young men believing in the traditional maleness or kind of traditional or problematic. He probably just means, traditional maleness, but also toxic masculinity could be an issue. He doesn't use those terms. I just wanted to use the opportunity as I'm winding down to give the respect to and recognition to people who have followed us on those platforms, so they can be encouraged to do so. One lady, it appears, Thalia Bourne, says, with programs for non-conformist youth, I like that language, help in the development of youth. I spoke to ASP Weeks about me, and I just spoke with the vice principal of Dominica Grammar School about doing school physiology, and they have identified some students as what they call at-risk youth, and what I prefer to use different nomenclature, because I do not like to use deviant nomenclature to describe the behavior of young persons. I like this non-conformist youth language that failure has recommended. And yeah, maybe some youth who are not behaving in traditional ways or not conforming to what we believe would be good for society. It's good to understand them and involve them in some sort of assistance that would help them to do otherwise. So I just wanted to recognize those comments and thank those who followed us on Facebook as well, as I prepare to make some closing remarks. I believe that at this point, it is not important and it's not advisable to have prescriptions without diagnosis. If you were to go to the doctor and you tell the doctor that you have a headache, and the doctor just tells you, here, take those pills, you would wonder if the doctor is a madman or mad woman for not asking you how long have you had this headache, what else hits, on what level do you have the headache, and start to triage you and ask you a variety of questions that make you understand that the doctor has diagnosed. In fact, some people have problems if they go to the doctor and the doctor does not touch them, because they want to have a physical touch from the doctor as an indication that the doctor cares. Because we all live in society, we have the tendency to believe that we can just say what our grandmother told us, although our grandmothers are very intelligent people, and we can just say something that we saw on CNN, and we can just import it in Dominica and get results. And we wonder why we go nowhere. The reason why we do not go to where we want to get is that we do not develop enough of a culture to appropriately diagnose the issue. And with this issue of male underperforming Dominica and elsewhere, we need to have proper intelligence to the particular issue you have. Yes, some things may generally relate, but we need to understand our story. And I mean, for the times when we do that, we get good results. Mr. Sanford looking at the data before we come back. So I want to say the first step to move this forward is to get an accurate understanding. The second step is to understand why the problem is not even worse, right? And why some of those young boys growing up in the same home, coming out of the same mothers, and doing things for others, we have to take this seriously and I don't think it's enough to rely on government. I think non-government organizations, faith-based organizations are responding to be involved in the process. Me as a university professor, senator at the university, as a business person, as a scholar, as a brother, I would lend my resources to what my life would be. I would say lastly on the point of spirituality. Faith is the belief in the things. Science is the belief in the things seen. Can there be connections between because where ideas and much of what affects the public is wrong. And much of what I teach my students is right and wrong, especially as a professor at a Christian university. Faith and the Bible and religion structure teaches us a lot. The Bible, the Quran, the Torah teaches us a lot about right and wrong. So everything about science is not about empirical data. Yeah, the theory of the opposite of
We seem to be having a technical problem here.
again?
Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry for the intervention, but you were breaking up. I'm not too sure what's the cause, so I was just taking it to your attention.
Okay, well, I hope that I'm winding down anyway. So I'm just saying that faith has a place. Maybe it may not be a scientific algorithm, but when we speak from our people's life, we will rely on our in that regard. I hope this is not the last discussion. I still would like to give way to other people within the panel. If there's any needs to be in the future, I'm happy to share and learn about
Yes, Dr. Seja, thank you so much. Unfortunately, after having an excellent audio reception and at the last minute, we had some difficulties here. I'm not too sure exactly why, but I want to thank all the panelists here. I want to thank Claudia Sanford for making himself available at the last minute. You're very inspiring, and likewise, Superintendent Weeks. I noticed that a couple of people asked Mr. Weeks a few questions. I'm just looking for the questions. One in particular, Mr. Weeks may want to address before he gets out. Somebody asked, Mr. Weeks, was there any family member who was there for you at some time in your younger days? I asked because there are some children or young persons who did not have anyone to guide them in any way. Some of them went astray because no one cared about them. Yes, I think.
Yeah, I saw that. I think that came from Frank. Is it?
Yes, that came from Artisan Lobe.
Lobe. Okay. That's a good question. As I said to a professor today, you have. I coined it that way, societal neglect, because I'm not sure what time he or she came up on the program, because I made it clear that mom having been institutionalized and not having a father, so really you're left with cousins and the very same family who helped to marginalize, and perhaps you can say did not help her cause. So we were really just left, a sister and I basically just left. It was a struggle. So mom was in and out, and did a very best until the welfare came on board. And in those days, Dr. Seja and young Stanford, that should excite him. The little money that you got to go to school was about $10 each. Perhaps it was a lot of money. You're a young budding economist, and the little economics that I did at the university bench, I don't think $10 could do too much for free people. So it was, I think that my thrust in relation to I not becoming dysfunctional was to really keep a level head to get a good education, one. And although I mentioned societal neglect, because you still had that selfishness, one or two people will chip in. But I think, again, coming back to the church and the other social organizations, the groups and so on, helped you to be in line. I can look at it that way. They helped. So the Scout group, other groups and so on, and it helped. But today, looking at it today, everybody's at their own business, and we must not run away from it. Since it does not, we've become a selfish society. And that's just a general statement. That's not for everyone, but I mean, you'd want to believe that everybody's selfish. It's me and I alone. So what? Whether you have, whether you don't have, you know. And I am saying to young people, notwithstanding what your status is, whether you come from a single home, whatever the struggles, you must be determined. You must have a bulldog, Rottweiler, a determination to survive.
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent Weeks. Thank you, Claudia Sanford and Dr. Seja. Thank you so much. Gentlemen, we have spent 2 hours interacting with the public on the topic marginalization of men. We have had a consensus here this evening that we'll be back with part 2. I am so grateful, and I'm sure the public is grateful. Our followers here, we want to thank you. Of course, on previous occasions, I identified you, but in the interest of time, tonight we're not going to do that, except I just want to say thank you to all of you. We are happy to have had you, and we're looking forward for part 2 next Sunday to continue such an important conversation. So gentlemen, once again, I want to thank you for taking time off to be here. Of course, you could be somewhere else doing something, but you chose to come here to discuss a very important national issue. And on behalf of the public, I want to thank Dr. Seja, a man who is very busy, has several caps, and he's just here in Dominica for a few days. Nonetheless, he made time for this program. I also want to thank Claudia Sanford for taking time off, inspiring young people, and of course, Superintendent Weeks. Always a pleasure to speak with you. So gentlemen, once again, I want to thank you, and I pray that you have a good evening. God keep you, protect you, and bless you, and may all of us have a pleasant week, a successful week. Good night.
Thanks a lot. Good night.
Thanks again for the invitation.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Yes.
Good night. Good night.
he just come to show off. He's so weak, he think he's so tough. Ashley is not my kind.
Lavinia, Ashley Kakiel.
Mwen pa ka vini.
Lavinia, Ashley Kakiel.
Mwen pa ka vini.
He just come back from England. He looking well and handsome. Lavinia, oh Tim.
Lavinia, c'est seulement aimer. Lavinia, c'est seulement aimer. I was working hard in England to seduce why I come down. Lavinia, oh dear.
Tell Ashley don't call my name. Tell Ashley he haven't got no shame. He have a right to tell me whether he's still thinking of me. Ashley don't know his mind.
He's mine. Lavinia, Ashley Kakiel.
Mwen pa ka vini.
Lavinia, Ashley Kakiel.
Mwen pa ka vini.
He dressed so neat in his suit. His afro looking so cute. Lavinia, oh dear. Lavinia,
Pas quittez-moi, embrassez-moi.
Aba ou quittez-moi.
Venez pour moi, wow, quittez-moi, chérie.
Aba ou quittez-moi. Dansez-moi, l'amour-moi, ou c'est ma tante-moi. Pas quittez-moi, j'aime-moi comme ça, c'est où qui la vie-moi.
Well, les asses côté, et j'ai la main.
Aba ou quittez-moi.
Venez l'amour à moi, moi les wawa pas.
Aba ou quittez-moi. Dansez-moi, l'amour-moi, ou c'est ma tante-moi. Pas quittez-moi, j'aime-moi comme ça, c'est où qui la vie-moi.
Ou t'es ma belle, quittez-moi galère.
Aba ou quittez-moi.
C'est où qui l'aime, puis où aime moi.
Aba ou quittez-moi. Dansez-moi, l'amour-moi, ou c'est ma tante-moi. Pas quittez-moi, j'aime-moi comme ça, c'est où qui la vie-moi.
En oublier là, j'ai dit moi comme ça.
Aba ou quittez-moi.
Pour tout possible, moi les basanos.
Aba ou quittez-moi. Dansez-moi, l'amour-moi, ou c'est ma tante-moi. Pas quittez-moi, j'aime-moi comme ça, c'est où qui la vie-moi.
Maman un petit bois, moi les wawa pas.
Aba ou quittez-moi.
Quittez-moi admirer, belle bijayo.
Aba ou quittez-moi. Dansez-moi, l'amour-moi, ou c'est ma tante-moi. Pas quittez-moi, j'aime-moi comme ça, c'est où qui la vie-moi.
Moi qui pleure, j'aime qui marcher.
Aba ou quittez-moi.
Belle de moi, moi les maillots.
Aba ou quittez-moi. Dansez-moi, l'amour-moi, ou c'est ma tante-moi. Pas quittez-moi, j'aime-moi comme ça, c'est où qui la vie-moi.
Kwa mwen wè piti moun sa la. Depi lè la mwen voye soti ya. Mon Dieu. Ti moun wala ou soti, ti moun wala ou soti, ti moun wala ou soti, depi soleil couché mwen ka espere ou.
Ti moun la ou sorti, ti moun la ou sorti, ti moun la ou sorti, depi soleil couché mwen ka espere.
Ti moun ke petet mwen fol, mwen ka di ou ke twe mwen ti moun. Ay 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 ou ke fe mwen pale mwen fe lide mwen pou pete tetou, e
Depi bouteille là. Timono là ou sorti, Timono là ou sorti, Timono là ou sorti. Depi soleil couché, moi qu'à espérer. Timono là ou sorti, Timono là ou sorti, Timono là ou sorti. Depi soleil couché, moi qu'à espérer. C'est pas pour être dans votre temps, c'est passé. Moi, that's where we are.